Hey everybody, we're back talking about normal forms and the normalization process. So far we've gotten through second normal form, and we're going to look at third normal form. Okay, so it's 3NF. It's our third normal form. Now to get to third normal form, right, you need to be in second normal form, and you need no transitive dependencies. Transitive. Can't spell. I'm sorry. That's definitely not my strong suit. Transitive dependencies. That idea that you depend on something that is not the primary key. Right? That thing depends on the primary key, but the thing you depend on is not. And one of the classic examples of this, I think my cat Ian wants to say hi. We'll see if he comes up here. A classic example of this is when we're dealing with, say, like an employee table. We look at employee, and we have some fields in here. Ian, you want to say hi? Say hi, say meow. This is Ian. He's my old man cat. So with the employee table, usually he'll just chill in my lap. And we've got our ID, we've got name. We said we had salary in here probably, and then maybe we have address. Address, which really is a multi-valued field. So you don't want to store the entire address in a single field. So you might have street address. And then you might have city, you might have state, and then you might have zip. But when you look at these pieces of information here, we do that dependency diagram. We say, okay, well, name, sure, that depends on ID, right? ID is our primary key. Your salary, again, that's going to depend on your ID, right? That's different for every person here, unless you have some sort of salary bands or some sort of exact salary based on like a job classification. The street address, yes, depends on the ID. The city and the state. So the interesting thing here is these actually depend on the zip code, and zip code depends on the ID, right, for a given zip. So this is our common example of a transitive dependency. Ian, you gotta sit on my lap if you're gonna sit. So what we would need to do here is break that out into its own table. So we would make a separate table here for zip here that would have the zip code, right, your code here. Then it would have the city and state. So for any given zip code, you're going to have a unique city and state, right? Because every zip code corresponds to a city and state. Because if you tell me what your zip code is, I can tell you what your city and state are, right? So the city and state depend on the zip code, and then we take these out of this table and we just leave the zip code because the zip code is dependent on the employee ID. So we're removing that transitive dependency here. And this happens a lot, and sometimes it's hard to see what actually depends on what. Right? So if maybe we did have in here, if we had like a job class, or job title, right? Now, it might not be exact job title, or maybe you have like, hey, programmer 1, programmer 2, programmer 3, senior programmer. That salary could depend on the job title. Again, depending on your classifications and your organization rules and whatnot. We'd like to imagine everyone gets paid for doing the same job, the same amount. But it doesn't often work that way, especially when you have to recruit people with experience, or when you want to pay women 75% less than you pay men. Right? Obviously, we're going to offer them less salary because that's just a crappy thing that happens. So salary could perhaps be dependent on title. So maybe we need to break out a job table that would have the title and then the salary. Right, and then we could remove salary from this table, and then job title then would relate to the job table. Right, an employee would have one job, but one job can be done by many employees. Right, and one employee has one zip code, but a zip code, many employees can live in a given zip code. And this one's probably pretty mandatory, right? If you're going to employ somebody, you typically need to know where they live. Right? There's all sorts of taxation rules that people seem to care about, so you need to know where your employees live because that matters for tax purposes. So that's third normal form, is getting rid of these transitive dependencies in our data. And if you're curious, you can go to this zip code lookup. The USPS, United States Postal Service, has a cool one here. So like 48334, I think, is our Farmington Hills zip code. Let me take a look here. Yeah, Farmington. Oh, that's for Farmington, Michigan. Now they're saying technically you could be Farmington Hills here, but the correct city here is Farmington. So they'll deliver to these ones that are incorrect. But if you look up Farmington, you'll get 48334 for our zip code here. What is, I forget what the OCC, I think it was 48334 for the Orchard Ridge campus. I'd have to look that up again and see. So that's looking at third normal form, which is second plus no transitive dependencies. And again, those transitive dependencies can be a little tough to look at. So it really does take some time and say, okay, let me do this dependency diagram, and really, does it actually depend on this attribute here? Right? Does your salary really depend on you, or does it depend on your job title? That sort of analysis here, and that takes a little bit of time. There's a lot of places this shows up that it's not always the easiest to see. So it takes some practice. We're going to be practicing that throughout the week.